All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Torah Studies. It's great to see you on this fine Tuesday evening of this holiday week. Always a beautiful time to get together. And my friends, tonight we have a class for the ages. This is going to be, I think this year, this has got to be in my top, I'm going to peg it maybe top 50, 53 classes of the year. I'm kidding. That's exactly how many there will be this year. But this is going to be incredible. This is, I will tell you this, guaranteed. This will be the greatest class this year on Parshas Toldot. Call shot. Calling the shot right now.
That's an easier.
Okay. So how does the parsha begin? Let's just jump right in. How does the parsha begin? What is the drama at the beginning of the story? First of all, before I ask that question, let me ask another question. Who recently got married in the Torah? Yitzchak and
Rivka.
Rivka. Good. As we begin the parsha, there's a challenge. What's the challenge? Well, they waited a little bit. But what's the challenge? What is the challenge with Yitzchak and Rivka? They cannot, help me out here.
The kids.
They can't have children. They can't have children. The Torah says that they daven, right? That Yitzchak and Rivka, they're davening to Hashem. They daven opposite each other. And the commentaries say that it's not necessarily that they literally davened opposite each other, but they davened in complementary. They prayed complementary to each other. That's kind of the opposite. I once heard a beautiful, I don't know if it's beautiful, but an interesting interpretation that says that each, and you may have heard me say this before in other contexts, that each daven, each prayed toward a different corner of the room. Why? Because they didn't know yet which direction to pray. We know nowadays we pray to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim, but they didn't know then where to pray. So how do you cover all four directions? Guess how? Right? You face in opposite corners. When you face in opposite corners, you got it. If you do the northeast corner and the southwest corner, well, my friends, you might have all the directions covered. But essentially, they're either way. That's a technical explanation. But certainly, they prayed, they davened, and Mazel Tov, Rebecca becomes pregnant. The Torah then continues to tell us, that the children, how do we translate that? There was some drama. There was some turmoil, and she was in a lot of pain, was the mother. And she said, Im Cain, if so, if this is the way it's going to be, Lama Zanochi, then why did I ask for this in the first place? You ever hear that expression? Be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. And she's thinking, if this is what pregnancy is like, if this is what it's going to like, carrying these children, did I really want this?
This child, he didn't know it was two.
Well, right. This child, right? If this is what pregnancy is like, you know what? This little did she know that motherhood wouldn't be any easier once these two were born, nor with their legacies, right? As they go on to become two nations. So I'm just giving you a quick overview, right? We all know this, but just to get into the flow of the story. And so the next piece of the narrative has her consulting with God. She goes to the oracle, she goes to the prophet, and she says, what's going on? This is before ultrasounds. Can you imagine? Before ultrasounds? So what's going on? I'm pregnant.
He goes to Noah's son.
Huh? Right. Yeah. Right. Consults with shame. Right. Exactly. The prophet of the time. And he says, he channels God, or God speaks through him or to him to share with Rebecca. He says, God says, here's the deal. Mazel tov, a double mazel tov. I'm paraphrasing here. Basically, that you're not pregnant with just one child, you're pregnant with two, right? And thus, that is what's going on. And not only are there two children or two soon-to-be-born children inside of you, but indeed, these are two nations. These are two, not just two individuals, but they're two archetypes, prototypes, two nations. Right. And when one nation, and these nations are going to struggle. You think this is a struggle? Oh, hold my beer, says God, as it were. Right. Just wait until things develop. These are two nations. And when one rises, the other one's going to fall. And when the other one rises, the first one's going to fall. And it's going to be a perpetual struggle. And indeed, so it has been. And for some reason, that soothes her, which, by the way, this is my own thought, parenthetical thought. Which teaches us a lesson that sometimes just knowing what's going on helps us get through the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. It's not like magically there wasn't a struggle, but just understanding what's happening, that awareness can help. Ein simcha kahataras hasvekos, says the Gemara. There is no joy as the joy of resolving doubt. When you're unsure about something, when you're not sure what's going on, why is this happening? The moment you have a framing, it makes it easier. It doesn't solve the problem, but it does make it easier to go through it and to navigate the challenge. And so indeed, she finds out that she's pregnant with twins. She carries the pregnancy, and the children are born, and we know them to be Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau. And and the rest, as they say, is history. We're going to look at the verse that describes the birth, or the first, one of the verses that describes the birth of the twins, and we're going to analyze it. Oh, just so you know, every time we're going to do every class in the same format. We're going to quote a verse or two. We're then going to look at Rashi, ask a bunch of questions, or maybe just one really good one. Essentially, point out the challenges and the flaws in Rashi's commentary, and then we'll go to a new insight in Rashi that completely reframes and rebuilds Rashi, and walk away with a pertinent life lesson. That is the game plan, and I am excited to do this with you. So let's get started. Jose, please read text number 1. Give me 1 second. Let me pull this up. My screen. Okay, take it away.
And her days to give birth were completed, and behold, there were twins in her womb.
Okay, and this is how the Torah describes not when she found out about the twins, that was earlier, but when she gave birth, right? That's what the verse is saying. She was, I don't know, she was full term, and boom, twins in her womb. I didn't want to say this, but I feel like I'm compelled to say this. The joke, and probably at this point everyone's heard it before. What do you call twins? Womb mates? So bad. So bad. I know. David's about to walk out at this point.
How many times have you said that?
Oh my gosh. So you have so many times. So many times. All right. So that is the verse. The verse says that, it was time for her to give birth. And yes, there were twins. And then it says, the first one came out. He was red and hairy, and they called him Esau or Esau. The next one came out holding onto the heel of his brother, Yaakov, Akev, right heel, Yaakov, Jacob, second son. That's not relevant to tonight. Text 1, Genesis 25:24. That is the verse we're going to deal with. Rashi. Remember, Rashi, we established a few weeks ago, Rashi's angle is self-proclaimed. Pshuto shal mikra, the simple meaning of the verse. Rashi's going to give you the basic, and that's not to disparage, but the simple, straightforward way of understanding the verse. Text 2a, Rashi's commentary. David, please take it away.
And her days were completed, but regarding Tamar, the passage phrases it differently. And it came about when she gave birth, and behold, there were twins in her womb. Genesis 38:27. This is because Tamar's pregnancy term was not filled, and she gave birth to them after 7 months.
Okay. Oh, hold on. Let's focus here in 2a for a second. Okay. 2b is the next Rashi. Okay, yeah. We're not there yet. 2a. Let's do this one thing at a time. So Rashi quotes, remember, always the header of Rashi is important. The Hebrew words of Rashi are vayimlu'u yameha, which are the first 2 words of the verse of text 1a, which, you know what? It's fine. The translation is okay. And her days were completed. Vayimlu'u means filled or completed. Yameh, her days, meaning the days of pregnancy. What is it? 42 weeks?
48.
40 weeks? What is pregnancy?
48.
40 weeks? All right, 40
48.
weeks. Yeah. All right. So her days or months, they were filled. And good. So Rashi comments. Oh, by the way, so what is Rashi saying? By the way, by Tamar, right, later on, Genesis 38. So that's what? 13 chapters later, by Tamar, it doesn't say that her days were filled. It says it was at the time of her birth, which Rashi says The reason for that is because it wasn't filled. Her pregnancy wasn't to full term. She rather gave birth to her twins after 7 months. Make sense? Yeah, you with me?
Yeah.
Sure, makes sense. No, it doesn't.
I mean, is he saying, like, basically, if it's not, he's like, because they did not use the exact same word,
Correct.
phrase,
Correct.
something must be different.
Correct. Exactly. The fact that here it says Vayimlu Yamel, and her days were filled, right? Complete, full. Whereas by Tamar it says, and it was when she gave birth. It didn't say that her days were complete. It says when she gave birth. So Rashi says, aha, discrepancy, aha, difference. We have it's not a contradiction, but you have what the right term is. You have a discrepancy. What is contrast between these two verses? He says, aha, this comes to tell us that Tamar's pregnancy was not complete, because it doesn't say complete, was not complete. It was rather, she gave birth after 7 months. And just to clarify that story, you all remember the story of Tamar and Yehuda, right? Tamar and Yehuda. So he had 2 sons. Well, he had a son. His oldest son was married to a woman named Tamar. The son dies. So the next, the younger brother marries the same woman. He dies. Now there's a third brother. And she says to her father-in-law, how about Shelah? Onan and Shelah. And he says, oh, he's way too young. What he means is not going to happen. Not going to happen. He will always be too young, because at this point, he's like, you got a track record. Not blaming you, but I'm also not, fool me once, fool me twice. They'll fool me 3 times, which is not a thing, but it is now a thing. So he's like, not happening. And so remember the story? So she dresses up as a prostitute, as a harlot, and she's on the side of the road. And Yehuda, and she times it when Yehuda, the father-in-law, is traveling, and he says, hey, how's it going? And she says, it's going well. I'm paraphrasing. Anyway, long story short, they're together, but he leaves like collateral for payment because he didn't have his digital wallet on him and whatever. And so then he doesn't come back to pay. He leaves the collateral, and then she's pregnant, but now she's pregnant, but she is technically kind of, supposed to marry this other guy, the third son. And so Yehuda's like, well, she's pregnant. And he didn't know it was her. Did I clarify that? She didn't look like her? I don't know if I clarified that. He didn't know that she was her. He didn't know who she was. She was wearing a whole thing. So anyway, there you go. So they say, oh, the executor put her to death because she was unfaithful, and that was whatever. That might be a capital crime back then in that context. And then at the end, she's like, by the way, before you execute me, FYI, the one who's the father of this child is the one who gave me this collateral, just FYIing. And Yehuda says, oh, that might have been me. In that case, cancel the execution. And according to one tradition, they got married and lived happily ever after. And if you're wondering, this seems like a very complicated family dynamic. Just wait until there was Thanksgiving over there in that household. That would have been super complicated. Back to the story. She gets pregnant from Yehuda, and she gives birth to twins, which is the verse that Rashi's quoting. And Rashi's pointing out what appears to be a very simple thing, that in this case, 2 sets of twins. Remember the tale of 2 cities? Here's the tale of 2 twins, 2 sets of twins. So Rebecca's twins are born full term, and Tamar's twins are born prematurely after 7 months. Make sense? What could go wrong? You're thinking, this is such a simple Rashi. How could we spend time on this Rashi? Yeah.
But also, why was it commented on Rivka's pregnancy instead of Tamar's?
Ooh, hold the sledgehammer question for a second. Hold on. 1 second. Hold that thought. Yes. I like how you're thinking. Hold that thought. Let's do the next Rashi. David, are you up to reading text 2b, please? One more.
There were twins in her womb. Tomim is the word for twins, is spelled defectively, missing an aleph and yud. Tamar's twins are described as Teomim, with the complete spelling, including the aleph and yud. This is because Tamar's twins were both righteous But in this case, one was virtuous and one was wicked.
Thank you. This is the very next Rashi on the same verse. There's two Rashis on the verse quoted in text one. One Rashi in the words Vayimlu Yameha, full term as opposed to premature. And Somim, right, the words Vihine Somim, and behold, there were Somim. Rashi says, whoa, by Tamar it says Te'umim, not Somim. What's the deal? Why extra letters and why missing letters? Oh, because in this case, in Rebecca's pregnancy, it was lacking. Why was it lacking? It was one of them was righteous, the other one was Esau. What are you going to do? Right? Batting 500. Whereas by Tamar, both were tzaddikim, who were they? Peretz and Zerach, right? They were both tzaddikim. And there you go. So they got the full spelling. They got the Tu'umim later on. This time it's just Somim to indicate that they were not both righteous. One was and one wasn't.
But that doesn't have anything to do with the header of Rashi that we're talking about.
Which is the full term.
No. Rashi has a second header.
Oh,
It's a second Rashi. Good question, David. Good question. Excellent. But it's a second Rashi. I should have been more clear. It's a second, on the same verse, there's a second Rashi with a new header. And the new header is Vihine Somim. And Rashi says, why is it spelled Somim and not Te'umim? Oh, because here it's missing, there it's full. In other words, there's, in the other case, in the case that we'll read in the 13 chapters later, Tamar's twins are both righteous. In this case, there was one righteous and one wicked. Now, if we were to analyze both Rashis seem to be addressing or focused on the same point. Hold on, let me try that again. If we look at both Rashis seem to be addressing the same core issue, the discrepancy between this set of twins and a further set of twins in the Torah, right? In this set of twins, okay, here we go. Let's do some Passover stuff. Manishtana had twins Hazeh, may had twins that will come up. But what's the difference between these twins and those twins? These twins say that it was full term. Those terms say, by these twins, it says that her days were complete. By those, it says when she gave birth. By these set of twins, it says Somim. By those set of twins, it says Te'umim. Rashi gives two answers. Rashi addresses both. This one was full term. That one was not full term. This one had one tzaddik, one rasha, one righteous, one wicked. That one had two righteous. Boom. Simple. Rashi's comparing and contrasting the two sets of twins. What could possibly go wrong? But Dasi already nailed the question. What was the question? Say it again.
Why is Rashi commenting here at Rivka's birth when Tamar's story hasn't happened yet?
Dasi is asking a question that there's no way. It's such a good question. There is literally no way around that question. It's an when you think, and I'm going to repeat it in a second. It's such an iron. Yeah, I'm going to repeat it. But let me build it up first. It's such an ironclad question. It's not just a good question. It's a question that is you cannot answer. It's an unanswerable question. And the question is, when you have two verses that have some sort of disparity, some sort of dissonance, some sort of maybe even a contradiction, the only time the question comes up is when you have the second instance. And then you're wondering, well, what happened? Why is it different than the first instance? You can't ask a question before you learned the other story. Because the 5-year-old, the Ben Chama Shemikra, hasn't yet studied the story of Tamar. We started from the beginning, and now we're up to this verse. You're going to start telling me why another verse is different? When we get there, we'll deal with it. Are you with me on the question? This is Dasi's question. And this is, by the way, this is a truth in Rashi. Well, except for this case, we have to figure out what's going on here. This question is so strong, it serves actually as the answer. Stay with me. Let me circle back to the question. The question is, right? You have verse A. Let's do the second Rashi. Verse A says Somim, twins. Verse B says Te'umim, twins. Spelled differently. How do we reconcile that? I'll spin you a tale. One tzaddik, one rasha, two tzaddikim, incomplete, complete, mazel tov. But when does the question even come up? Once you have both verses. The question doesn't come up the first verse that you have because there's no contradiction or there's no dissonance. There's no contrast. There's no nishtana. You don't ask ma nishtana before you hit Passover. It's like, why on this night are we eating matzah? And then every night you're comparing two things. Imagine you haven't yet eaten matzah. Ma nishtana, whoa, slow down, cowboy. What are you even talking about? We don't have a question of Tamar until you get to chapter 38 of the book of Genesis.
We do act manishtana before we eat matzah.
Yeah, but we
Right
saw it baking. we saw it on the Seder plate. No, you're right, but we've done a Passover before. Speaking of chametz, right? We got some chametz. You with me on this? The question is on both Rashis on our verse because Rashi is addressing the two discrepancies. You can't have a discrepancy without a discrepancy. That's not a thing.
No.
That's not a thing. I'm sorry. You can't. But
doesn't
Rashi
matter.
knows. But Rashi, you're right. But Rashi already studied the whole thing before he wrote his commentary. Good. That's your answer.
Not the 5
Good.
year old.
But Rashi is going with Pshat. Rashi is taking us. Rashi's addressing a question that comes up on the basic understanding of the verse at hand. That you would know another verse that hasn't happened. When you get there, Rashi should address the construction. Whoa! Didn't we call twins Tomim before? Why Tuumim now? That would be the way to ask it. When you hit the second instance, now you have the discrepancy. You don't have the discrepancy until you have both verses. Again, I'm going to say what I said before. It's such a good question. It actually serves as the answer. And what I mean by this is, there's no way you can't get around this question. The question forces you to reimagine and to re-understand, to reinterpret what Rashi is saying. Rashi cannot be comparing and contrasting two different stories, a story that hasn't happened yet. It can't be. It can't be that Rashi's comment was driven by a story that happened later. It has to be driven by the verse in front of us. Are you with me on that? It must be driven. Now, he does quote a story that happens later, but it can't be driven by the contrast because the contrast hasn't been brought up yet. It has to be driven by the verse at hand. And therefore, we need to look at the actual verse that we're dealing with and see what was the question in this verse, not later, that Rashi is addressing. I want to pause here, and I want to do this one more time. For 800 years, everyone who studied this Rashi understood the same thing, that Rashi is explaining a discrepancy between two stories of twins. And the Rebbe comes along and says, that cannot be the meaning of Rashi. It can't be. Why would Rashi address here in instance one a contradiction that only comes up when you have the second instance? Therefore, you have to say, concludes the Rebbe. It's an answer that comes from the question. You must therefore say that the entire commentary of Rashi is driven not by a story that happens 13 chapters later, but by the wording of our verse. There's something wrong in our verse that Rashi is seeking to explain. Let's go. Mm-hmm. Let's look back at the verse. And you know what? You guys are going to come up with a question. Let's do it this way. Let's all put on our Ben Chamish Mikra, our you don't have to be 5, but our, the basic understanding of the verse. Let's take a look at text number 1. Okay, I'm going to read it in Hebrew, and you tell me what the problem is. Vayimlu yamel aledes, and her days to give birth were completed. Vihine som vidna, and there were twins in her womb. What's the question? Let's start with the first half of the verse. What's the question in the first half of the verse?
Did she actually give birth?
Good. Keep on coming with the questions. Good. One question. Another question.
Could her days to give birth were completed, meaning she was already menopausal?
Okay, good. What else? Think of a more obvious question. Think of an even more obvious question.
She didn't know she was having twins?
She knew she was having twins. Give me a more obvious question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why does Rashi even have to say she finished off, she completed her pregnancy?
Obvious.
Why is that? I mean, normally that's understood, right?
Oh, so that's not Rashi, the verse itself, and that's the question. The question is, there have been many people thus far in Torah up until Genesis
right. I meant that. Yeah.
Yeah, there have been many people thus far that have given birth, in Torah that a Torah stuff, and not once has it used the phrase "Vayimlu Yamel Ledes," and her days were complete. And I'll ask you a very simple question: when someone gives birth, yeah, typically you say, "Oh, how's the baby? Boy or girl? What's the weight? What's the specs?" Right? Pulling out what do you call it? Tape measures, right? That's what. When was the last time someone asked, "Oh, was it a full 9 months?" That's not typically. I'm not saying no one's ever asked that question, but it's not a typical factoid that comes up in conversation.
It's not a nice question to ask.
Also, it doesn't seem to be relevant.
He's commenting.
Vayimlu. So one second. So Vayimlu Yamel Ledes, the Torah says. The Torah goes out of its way. It doesn't just say she gave birth. That would be normal for Torah to do. Vayimlu Yamel Ledes, and her days to give birth, her pregnancy, her term was full. She had a full term pregnancy. And Rashi immediately,
Faster.
huh? Well, hold that. That's I hear you. I was thinking about that also, but let's put that aside for a second. The Torah is saying Vayimlu Yamel Ledes, that she completed her full term. Rashi immediately is wondering, one second. One second. Why is it relevant? Why do I need to know? Why does the Torah go out of its way to tell us that she gave birth, full term, 9 months? Who cares? In other words, the question is, like using the language of the Talmud, Maida hava, what happened, happened. How is it relevant to the story? How's it relevant to the narrative?
Like, there's no need to comment on. There's no need to even say like her days to give birth were completed if we already know what the normal term.
We know normal, not who doesn't matter. It's not relevant.
About the length of time that she had the babies in her, and there was a connection between them and her.
It's like
So I hear you. So once I went this, this is the question that's driving Rashi. Now, how does Rashi address it? Let's break this down. Let's break this down. The question that's bothering Rashi is, why would the Torah tell us that it was full term? Who cares? Who cares? What does it matter? What does it make a difference? What happened? Who was it 9 months or 8.5 months? Okay, whatever. Why does it tell us that? Comes along, Rashi says, you know why? Because the Torah is dropping a hint for a verse that has not yet come up. Now, one second. Rashi doesn't expect us to know that story yet. He's telling you. Do you know why the Torah tells us here that it was full term? Because later on, there will be another set of twins, and the Torah is going to use a different language. And had it not used this language here, you wouldn't know to create a contrast. Rashi's question is not driven by the contrast, because otherwise he would have written it on the second instance. Rashi's question is driven by the verse right here, where the verse says that it was full term. Rashi's saying, who cares? And the answer that Rashi's giving is because by dropping the phrase full term here, that indicates, that drops like a pin, that drops a clue, a breadcrumb. What was the story about the breadcrumb and the kids in the house and the eaten by the whatever? Right, that
Hansel
drops.
and Gretel.
There you go. It drops a clue that what? That when the Torah will tell us about another set of twins, and it will use a different set of terminology. It will not say Vayimlu Yamel Ledes. It will say, one second, what's the Hebrew? It will say instead, Vayihi be'es lidata. And when she gave birth, what about the full term? Last time we read about twins, it talked about full term. How come now it doesn't? Rashi's saying that the Torah is specifically trying to highlight the fact that this one was full term, because to point out that the next one was not full term. Does that make sense? No.
You could still,
I still have a question.
One second, Mom, 1 second. Yeah, go ahead.
you could still just put it on Tamar's. I don't know why it has to go in the first one.
Because
So, like,
that
what
wouldn't
about the
answer
text?
the verse here. Rashi's question is on our verse. It's not a question on Tamar.
He's saying that it's really just a bookmark.
Correct. That's what Rashi's telling you.
It doesn't seem like it should be necessary to put a bookmark.
Right.
Well, hold on one second.
Semantics.
Well, one second. Let's break it down. In other words, Rashi's question is not driven by the contrast. It's driven by what seems to be extraneous words in our verse. In other words, the question's on our verse. It's not because we read later
But
on.
He's mentioning the second.
What's the question is here? And Rashi says the only way to explain this is to say that the Torah was intentionally dropping a bookmark here to create a contrast for what will happen later. I don't expect you to know later. I'll tell you, I'll quote the whole verse later, and I'll tell you what's happening later, but just know that the reason why the Torah goes out of its way here is to draw a contrast. Now, that doesn't explain why that's important. I think that's your question.
Right.
Who cares?
Right.
Maybe that's what's bothering everybody right now. It's like, whoa, you're telling me
Yeah.
the Torah goes out of its way to tell
Yeah.
us that that she had full term, so that we'll understand that later on when the Torah uses a different terminology about Tamar, that hers wasn't full term. And then I'm still confused because I'm going to ask the follow-up question, which is, who cares? So Rashi explains. Remember there was a second Rashi? Rashi explains in the second Rashi. That's why we have the second Rashi. Because Rashi over there also seems to do the same thing. He's comparing and contrasting two verses, but when you have a comparison, it should always be on the second one because you can't compare until you have both. No. Rashi's answering the question that we had. He's saying, why is it that Rivka, our story here, why was hers full term? And why was Tamar's not full term? And why is it important for us to know? Because it reveals a truth about the character and the nature of the children they were carrying, which is also indicated in the different way that the word twins is written in Hebrew, whether it's tumim or tomim or teumim. That Rebecca was carrying one tzaddik, one righteous child, and one rasha, and Tamar was carrying two righteous.
But what did that have to do with the number of?
What does that have to do with the number of months? I'm going to give you two answers. You ready? Okay. I want to make sure this is where we need to be. This is where we need to be in the narrative. But let's understand how we got here. We walked in thinking that Rashi is verse A, verse B. How do we reconcile? No, you can't reconcile until you have two verses. You have one verse. Rashi's explaining this verse, the first verse. Why does it tell us that it was full term so that it uses this terminology that we'll know later on that it was a full term? Why is that important to know? Because it also tells us about the nature of the children, that here it was, she had one tzaddik, one rasha, and there both tzaddikim. Now the question is, what's the connection? Let's take a look at another text. So 1 second. Pause. From here on out, I'm going to give you two explanations of this. What I like to call the cynical explanation. That's to be the first one. And the second one is going to be the Chassidic explanation. The cynical and the Chassidic. Coming soon to a theater near you. Right? The cynic and the mystic. All right, you ready? The cynic and the mystic. So the cynical way of looking at it, we're going to read this inside in a second. Let me tell you outside. The cynical way of looking at it, I don't know if cynical is the right word, is like this. When there's two tzaddikim, so God wants them to hit the world sooner than later. So 7 months, you're out. Right? There's so much light. So much light. So that's why it's Yalla. Hurry up offense. Let's go. No huddle offense. Let's go.
A womb with a view.
Yes, a womb with a view. Right. This is it. We're moving. We're moving forward. 7 months, more or less ready to go. Let's go. Both tzaddikim. That's why by Tamar, the Torah tells us specifically not using the language that it drops here as a bookmark, that it was full. It wasn't full. Why? That itself is an indication. By the way, the two children being born are both righteous. It's hurry up offense. What about over here? Yaakov is good. Esau, hold him back. Keep him in. 2 months less. Let's see. We're not ready. Hold on. Oh, we're not ready. It's gonna be complicated. Let's hold back Esau. I call that the cynical answer. I'll tell you why, but let's read this inside. Question?
No, it's great. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for an auction. Sold. You got the banana on the wall with the duct tape. Okay.
Hold back Esau, was that perhaps to give Esau a chance
Ooh.
to
Now you're blending Chassidic into the cynical. Hold on. Stick with the cynical. Stick with the cynical.
So if we're being cynics, does that mean those of us that were full term?
I got to repeat that. David's asking, does that mean that if we're being cynical, that those of us that were full term, what does that mean about us that were full term? Oh, world's not ready yet. No, look, it seems like a specific, the way Rashi understands it, a specific twin contrast. It's got to be a twin. It's the whole discussion about twins, right? That Rashi says, why tell us about full term, not full term? By the way, I like your answer because twins are often not full term. To me, that's a very shot answer, but that's not what Rashi does. Rashi says, no, the reason is to drop a pin and say, oh, FYI, pay attention. Here it used the word full term. When it doesn't use it, it means it wasn't. And then our question is, who cares? What does it mean? Oh, well, one's Tzaddik, one's Russia. Well, why? What's the correlation? What's the connection? Connection is full, two tzaddikim. I mean, such light. It's got to come out into the world after 7 months. When there's a little bit of complication, we're not running anywhere. Now, let's read this inside. What I just told you, this last little wrinkle, is coming from text, one second, text number 7, 82, text 70. Everything that we skipped, I've already told you outside. Don't worry. You're in good hands with Allstate. All right, text 7, 82. Jake, please read.
7?
Yeah.
Look, you said the reason is simple. God hastened to bring 2 righteous people to the world.
Thank you. The Toldot Derech comments and explains. He's a commentator on Rashi, and he says, "Why? What's the connection? Right? Makesha. What's the connection? Simple. When you have 2 righteous people, God says, "Yalla, let's go. 7 months, time to go." When it comes to tzaddik and Rasha, not so excited. Not so hurry up outfits. I got to ask you a question on the cynical approach. I call it cynical because what we're really saying is that because there's an Esau, so Rivka has to struggle for 2 more months. It was a difficult pregnancy. Why should she get punished? What's going on here? She should get punished with a difficult pregnancy for 2 more months because one of her kids is Esau. Is that her fault? Question number 1. Question number 2. The whole story doesn't make sense. Compare the 2 mothers, right? Rivka, tzaddikus. Yitzchak, tzaddik, righteous people. The children, as far as we know, were conceived in kosher circumstances. Compare this with Tamar. How are her twins conceived? I don't know. Deception, deceit, prostitution, side of the road. I mean, that's what's going. I mean, this is what the Torah says, right? That's the bottom line, right? How does it make sense even? Forget why is it Rivka's problem to have to carry them for another 2 months? How does it make sense even that Rivka's children is one tzaddik, one Rasha, and Tamar's are both tzaddikim? That doesn't make sense. There's a lot of questions that we can ask on this, and even the core question of like what the Toldot Derech said. So yeah, if there are 2 righteous, so we want to get them out into the world, and if one is not righteous, so it's like, but stop. So it's not stopping him anyway. It's just delaying 2 months. Is that really of utility? Is that really a benefit? I mean, yeah, it was a cute vart. It was a cute thing to say, but like, what does it really mean? But so I want to introduce the deeper understanding of it, and this is the Chassidic understanding of it. And honestly, this is the one that to me feels better. I know we just read a super commentary Rashi, but we're looking at this through the lens of the Rebbe, and here's how the Rebbe explains this a little bit differently, actually, completely differently.
I have an idea.
Yeah,
I don't know whether it's coming up or not, but I mean, it says, but Tamali, and she fulfilled. So maybe she did as much as she could.
Okay, but still the question is, why does she get a child, one child that's a Rasha, and Tamar gets 2? It seems like the opposite script. So
Because
here's
her intentions were good. It was to continue the
sure, yeah.
and
Tamar's
she had to sacrifice a lot to do that.
yeah.
So
Tamar
she's
had
being
good
rewarded
intentions.
by
You could say that, but then why was Rivka punished? I have another question. Let's ask more questions. So Rashi said that by
one Russian.
Pardon?
She gave birth to Russia.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so let's ask that
Okay.
question now. Let's keep on going with questions then. So even on Rashi says Tamar had 2 tzaddikim, but Rebecca had 1 tzaddik, 1 Russia. Interesting. Was Esau born yet? At what status was he a Russia? A wicked person. He wasn't born yet.
After 13.
So what were you holding back? What's going on here? You're holding back someone who eventually lived the life of a wicked person. Okay, but was he wicked in utero? Was he wicked at birth?
Well, he was a bit wicked in utero.
But then, okay, so then good, let's ask more questions. Does that mean that he didn't have free choice? He was destined to be wicked? That itself is problematic. Right? The Talmud says that a lot of things are predestined. Avot tzaddik for Russia, like Hamar. But it's not foretold whether a person is going to be tzaddik or Russia. That's up to free choice. Hakol b'dei Shemayim, chutz m'yireh Shemayim. Everything's in the hands of heaven except for our moral choices. So then what is
ADHD?
So what's going on here? I hear you. So I want to share what I think is the only way to understand this, all of this stuff. These are I'll ask you more questions. Let's have fun. What was Yitzchak thinking by the end of this restore portion to give the blessings to Esau? He didn't know his son. Remember, by the end of the story, Yaakov steals the blessings because the father wants to give Yitzchak, Isaac, the father wants to give the blessings to his older son, Esau. He didn't know he was a Russia. What was he thinking?
But he needed it.
Oh, he was blind. 1 second. He was blind, so he didn't know. And so whatever, like, is that really what's going on? Is that really the situation? Like, he didn't know? And then why did the wife, Rivka, the mother, right? Why did she go around? Why did she try to dupe her husband? Oh, Yaakov, go sneak in, go wear the clothes. What's happening here? Deception? This is the moral of the story? That spouses should deceive each other instead of having an open and frank conversation? There's so many holes in all of these stories. And I feel like if I share one point, it might answer all of these questions and more with 1 point. And here's the 1 point. When we say that Esau was a Russia, we don't mean that he was a Russia in utero. When we say that, there's a medrash that says that when Rivka, the mother, passed by, when she was pregnant, when she passed by a house of Torah study, there was movement. And when she passed by a house of idol worship, a pagan place, there was movement. So what? The fetus, that wanted to serve idols, where does that come from? Yitzchak or Rivka, where does that come from? Love? I mean, what are we saying? Genetics that come from what, who, what, where, when? Okay. The Rambam talks about 2 types of people. And for those that have studied Tanya, it might sound similar to a tzaddik and a beinoni, but here we go. The Rambam talks about 2 personas, the Chassid HaMa'ula and HaKovesh Es Yitzro. The Rambam says there are some people that just want to do good and do good. They're just good through and through. And there are certain people that their destiny in life is to be Kovesh Es Yitzro, to feel the burn, to feel to feel the temptation, and to have to stop it in its tracks. Certain people aren't given a big and bold Yetzer Hara. Some people are a goody-goody, the way the title of this class goes. It's not so good to be goody. Some people are goody-goodies. They're born like that. They're born like that. They want to do right. They want to be happy. They want to do well on the test. They want to, whatever. And then some people are born with a tremendous drive in the opposite direction. Now, what's the point? Why did God create some people with a tremendous Yetzer Hara, negative drive? So that they should be evil, be wicked? No. It's so that the person should have the opportunity to practice that self-restraint. Again, in the language of Rambam, in Shmona Prakim, which is his introduction to the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot, right? Rambam says that the purpose of this is so that person should exercise self-restraint. Some people are destined to not have to. Many of us are destined to have to. We also know that if God gives us a tremendous fire burning in a negative direction, he also gives us a tremendous fire burning in the opposite direction, in the positive direction, so that we can be kovesh es Yisrael, so that we can conquer our inclination. But again, the important thing to remember is some people don't have the desire, the negative desire. Some people have it in spades, but also have the potential to stop it in its tracks, and that is their purpose in life. Literally, their purpose in life is to be kovish as Israel, to conquer your nature, your inclination. So Chassidus explains that this is exactly the duality or the two personas of Yaakov and Esau. Yaakov is the Chassid HaMe'ula. He's good through and through. He's the Ish Tam Yoshev Olim, the sincere guy who's in the tent, he's studying. He's the do-gooder. He's the goody-goody. Esau is the guy who's attracted to other stuff. Whoa. Just because he's attracted to that doesn't mean he has to do it. Doesn't mean that's his destiny to do it. Is he an actual Rasha? Not until he doesn't hold himself in. Somebody that has an inclination is not the same as someone who goes ahead with that inclination and gives into that inclination. Which means that Esau's destiny was meant to be the duality of the Yaakov-Esau pregnancy, right? Rivka is pregnant with twins. She was meant to carry and birth the two personas of spiritual achievement. The one who finds it easy and the one who finds it with challenge and difficulty, but both great people. What happened was Esau, when push came to shove, gave in. So practically speaking, he lived the life of a Rasha. But when he was in utero, when he was the highest level. Let's take a look at Rambam. We're going to read this inside.
What does that have to do with full term?
Yeah.
Because I haven't answered it yet. Let's read Rambam for a second. Text 9a. Maimonides Rambam Shmona Prakim. The philosophers maintain that there are two personalities, those whose deeds are good and important, but who crave and desire terrible things. They subdue their inclinations and reign in their desires. This is Akovish as Yitzra. 84, next page. Then there are the pious ones. Their good behavior is stimulated by their desires and inclinations. They perform good deeds because they crave and desire them, i.e. the good deeds. They want to do good and they do good, whereas the first persona here is the Kovish es Yitzro. So these are the two personas. Rebecca was carrying both. Turns out that these children, it's not a curse. It's not like one was blessed and one was cursed. They were both blessed. In fact, one could argue and say, oh, why did I stop short? Sorry, let's continue reading. Take a look at the next one. Maimonides continues 9b. The consensus among philosophers is that the pious are more praiseworthy and perfect than those who reign in their passions. The latter might be identical to the righteous in behavior, yet they are of a lower stature due to their negative tendencies. Even if they don't surrender to these tendencies stain their souls. That's what the philosophers say. Rambam continues, yet when we examine the words of our wise sages, we find that those tempted to sin are more praiseworthy and complete than those with no sinful cravings. They went so far as to say that the more perfect and complete one is, the more desirous of sin one becomes, the more difficult it becomes for one to overcome those desires. Moreover, they said, our reward is commensurate with how difficult it is for us to resist our tendencies, which means not how they live their lives, but in potential, who's greater, the Yaakov persona or the Esau persona? If Esau would have stopped himself, who would have been greater? Esau. Turns out that's what he didn't, but she was pregnant. And as she was pregnant, this child had an inclination toward idolatry, but also had the ability to stop it. If he would have stopped it, it would have been the greatest. That's why she was full term, to indicate that it was a complete pregnancy, containing both spectrums, the full spectrum of service of God. When he was born, and when Vayigdulu Hana'arim, when they turned bar mitzvah, Vayesav, Ish Sada Yodei Tzayid, then Esau turned to his behavior at 13. That's 13 years later. We asked the question, what's the connection between the full term and that one was a tzaddik, one was a rasha, partial, and we gave the answer before that. Well, when you both tzaddikim, God says go. Now we know it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Number one, full term, it's the full spectrum. Number two, full term means that Esau was given 2 extra months of kochot, of energy from his mother, so that he should be able to, when he was born, conquer it. It still didn't work because free choice is free choice. No one takes away free choice. You can be given all of the abilities in the world, but free choice is still free choice. God never twists our arm to do good or to do the opposite. It's always our choice. Turns out that Rebecca's pregnancy is full term because she carried the full suite of possibilities. She carried a Yaakov who was perfect in and out, and an Esau whose destiny in life was supposed to be one of challenge and overcoming challenge. He didn't, but that was supposed to be his destiny.
Also, isn't there a connection between like Esau's name and like complete or like full or something like that? Like the reason they say he was hairy because he was almost like he was like a full,
like an adult.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But in this context, it's that her pregnancy represented the full. When you look at human beings, there are some people that are good through and through, and some people that have to work on themselves. This represents the full spectrum of that experience. Her pregnancy needed to be full because she needed to infuse or try to infuse her unborn son Esau with that ability. Now we understand why Yitzchak at the end of the parsha wants to bless Esau. Doesn't he know who his son is? He does. And he thinks, if I only give him one more boost, if I only give him one more spiritual jolt, if I only take the paddles one more time, maybe he'll have the inspiration he needs to finally control himself, to finally rein himself in. He has tremendous power. Esau, as much power as Yaakov has, Esau has even more power. Full pregnancy, both spectrums of both sides of the experience. And Yitzchak thought, if we just give him another boost, and his mother said, I gave him 9 months of boost. This is not going to work. It's not going to work. Another blessing is just more enabling. You give more blessing, he's going to take it and he's going to misappropriate that blessing, also the spiritual energy. It's too late. It's too late. I've seen the story play out, and it's not going to work. So we need to give the blessings to Yaakov, and through Yaakov to influence his brother. It's going to have to happen that way. It's not going to happen directly through himself. Yeah.
What kind of example is that setting? I mean,
why didn't she tell him?
No, I mean, if Rivka was birthing these two prototypes of people, then we should have seen the more difficult one succeed.
The reason why we don't see it succeed is because it's a real story.
Because this
is not a fairy tale.
This is not Gan Eden.
Right. And no, it's a real, no, you're asking a good question. If the story had a happy ending, Esau would have been Kovesh Es Yitzro. He would have reined himself in and would have had a happy ending. And Mashiach would have been here. But life doesn't always have a happy ending. Sometimes a person has a challenge and doesn't overcome it. And the message for us in these stories in Torah is to remember that we do have the ability, and we shouldn't learn the lesson from Esau, and we should rather strive to overcome, to know that we have that ability.
But the Torah sort of acts like he was a Rasha from the beginning. I mean, there was no hint that he had this ability to overcome.
Well, what's interesting is when you look at the way they're described in the Torah portion, it says pretty clearly that where he turns is Vayigdalu Hanarim, when they became of majority age, which we understand bar mitzvah. That's when we see the contrast of where
they had the same upbringing and different.
Yeah, and until then, he might have had temptations, but maybe he reined it in. And the idea is, again, it's a very honest and true understanding of life, and that is okay. Yeah,
I can see why Jacob should be our father,
right?
But reading Breshit, I don't see anywhere where they get that he was a rapist and a murderer.
Who, Esau?
Esau. He came in from the field.
Right.
So Bob,
it's a medrash.
It's a midrash.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say anything about a maiden. And it doesn't, and he was exhausted. And they say it's because he was a murderer. He was exhausted That's a midrash.
It's a medrash, yeah.
So he wasn't evil.
I would say this. The medrash gets it probably because it's the family story that we know. Medrash didn't make it up. It's like it's the part of this narrative that we know. I will say one more.
Wasn't evil.
I hear what you're saying.
Torah says it here.
But hold on.
Where?
Once I hold on the read, I think there's another point that's very important.
Not in the Torah.
Right. Okay.
Not in the written
Not
Torah.
the written.
Not the written Torah.
Now, here's what I think is important. The question becomes, if Esau failed, I think this was maybe your question a second ago. If Esau fails, then where do we have the prototype
Yeah.
of someone who has the challenge and who overcomes? Where do we see that? So 1 second. This is what Rivka was trying to do. She said to Yaakov, put on the clothing of Esau, right? And get the blessings. Meaning that at this point, your brother failed as the role model for that prototype. Because he wasn't a successful archetype. We want to have an archetype of someone who's perfect through and through and someone who overcomes challenge. That one didn't work. That one failed, right? He didn't control himself. So Rivka says, okay, so Yaakov, now you're going to need to be the prototype of that guy also. Put on the garments. In other words, now you're going to do a little cosplay, as the kids say, and you're going to dress up like your brother, right? To show an example of what it's like to be out there in the world, as it were, and be able to like be okay to look like an Esau on the outside, but be a Yaakov on the inside. And that's honestly, for most of us throughout our history, that's kind of what we've been trying to do. We dress up in the suits of Esau, right? We don the clothing, literal and figurative clothing of Esau, and inside we're meant to be Yaakov. We're meant to be righteous and covetous is true. So just to conclude what we talked about today, we looked at Rashi. We saw a Rashi that seems to very simply be comparing and contrasting two verses. We pointed out that can't be the case because you can't compare two verses until you have both verses. And we explained that Rashi is specifically dealing with our verse, which says which tells us something weird about a full-term pregnancy. Who was wondering that the Torah is addressing it? And Rashi's answer is no, we weren't wondering that, but the Torah's putting a bookmark, as you said, a bookmark for the next time twins are born, to contrast, to create the point of contrast for the next time, that these were full term, those weren't full term. Why not? Well, because one had a tzaddik and a Russian, the other one had two tzaddikim. Who cares? What is that? We have two ways of understanding. Either because the more righteous you are, the quicker you come out, and then if it's wicked, then, well, good luck. Or that was a bit cynical. Or we say, no, on the contrary, that the one that has the Russia wasn't really a Russian. It wasn't really wicked. He had that he had the shtukas.
But we were already being told about the difference in their personality. Yaakov grabbing his heel and saying, "Don't let me out."
Right.
Let me go out first.
Rabbi,
We already saw where the personalities were gonna go.
Yaakov was pulling.
That wasn't the free will.
No, the tendencies were there. The free will was for him to overcome.
Right. Tendencies were there. And by the way, Yaakov was grabbing Esau's heel, which seems to, he was being the aggressive one. Yaakov was being the aggressive one, which is a bit of a role reversal. Yaakov was the more placid. Anyway, the point is though, and the main point here is that the Hasidic interpretation is on the contrary, that the person who has the corrupt tendency is not automatically evil, has the greatest potential. And that's a message, I think, to everyone. When you look at someone and you see a flaw, or you look at yourself and you're like, I have this thing inside, like, does God even love me? Slow it down. Perfect and complete. In other words, your role is the battle then. And there's honor in the battle. There's glory in the fight. That's where the magic happens, precisely in the battle. It's not about the inner perfection. It's about exercising the strength. Ezehu Gibor Pirkei says, who is strong? Hakovesh es Yitzro, the one who conquers his own inclination. That is the mark of strength. If it's easy, where's the strength? If it's difficult, there's the strength. All right, I'll take questions. We'll close out formally, so that everything, and then I'll stick around for questions. Thank you for joining me. The moral of the story is, let's be strong and exercise the ability of self-restraint, and that is the greatest advantage. Turns out that the pregnancy term was full because the experience was full, because it was the highest level of the experience. All right.
it's all for us to learn.
Doreen.
Everything is for us to learn from. I have a
Correct.
problem starting from page 1 of Bereshit. There is a lack of good communication between
Correct.
all of us. And there's
Correct.
also nature and nurture. Yeah, Yitzhak loved Yaakov for what he could do.
Right. He loved him for his potential. If only he got it right.
If
He
only-
was willing to double down. He was willing, like in gambling, he was going to keep on putting down money on Esau. He was going to keep on. And Rivka says, you know what? Walk away from the table.
It
You
was
can't keep on
it
throwing
appeared to be materialistic from what I read in here, because Yitzhak loved him for what he could go out and bring to him. I don't know if he said, "Oh, I'm so proud of you" or not. Rivka saw this other child and probably had no control on an Esau. So there's also how you're raised. And to me, these are all wonderful lessons to learn. But every page we go through, people are not really talking to each other. And if we're up at 2 a.m. next week, God willing, we'll plug in.
Good.
Israel.
In
Ari,
Israel.
I have a little question. One is, so where was Yaakov's free choice?
Yeah. He doesn't have much.
Yeah, and okay.
He was mama's
Maybe you'll
boy.
answer. And then the other one was, why did he need the bracha if he was so good?
He needed to get the bracha of Esau to do both personas. Both, number one, to help Esau fulfill his mission, but also to be the one who would also experience a little of the deception and then have to overcome that also in his own life. So he had to taste a little bit of that,
Oh boy.
that reality.
Oh,
David, jump in.
This is more of I guess, a subjective interpretation, but looking back at the Midrash about Rebecca standing, when she would stand near a synagogue or a house of study, Jacob would struggle when she passed by a pagan worship house, Esau would. How do we know? Because, they're in the womb. So maybe it was the reverse, and the 2 months left in the completed, pregnancy allowed Jacob to, to become the righteous one.
Right. Good question. That's the way that it's framed in the Midrash and the other sources, that, one was pulling one way and one was pulling the other way. And it wasn't that he was destined to be an idol worshiper, it was that he had a curiosity that he would then be empowered to overcome, but he didn't. But you're right. I understand your question. How do we know who was who? You're right. Without the sonogram,
that's right.
It's a little bit more complicated. Anyway, all right. Good to see everyone.
Thank you,
David, Bert, Julie, Eric. Good to see you guys. Matt, Mom, Sam, Danny, Lila.
What's the cat's name?
Lots of blessings. Sorry.
What's the cat's name?
Oh, the cat Cloudy.
Oh, yummy.
He's very big, and as soon as he hears me on a Zoom or on the phone, he decides that he has to take part. So that's why he has to participate. Yes.
He's a cat who loves Torah study. What can we say?
We had a 90-pound lap dog, and it was my lap he liked to sit in. 90 pounds.
Wow. See you guys. Lila.